Imagine making a code change, you merge into main, and it's automatically live on Azure. That's what we're going to set up today. We're going to do that by creating a continuous delivery pipeline using GitHub Actions. Before we can create the pipeline, we first need to set up all of the resources needed to host a website in Azure. I'm going to take you step by step through all of the Azure setup. Then we'll use GitHub Actions to create a delivery pipeline, and you'll never have to manually deploy again. .NET is cross-platform, and Linux is often cheaper and more performant than Windows. I want to make sure you get the most bang for your buck, so I'm going to show you how to do all of this hosting on Linux. This video is broken down into 3 stages. First, we're going to set up all of the resources needed in Azure. Second, we're going to authenticate GitHub Actions with Azure. And then finally, we're going to create the delivery pipeline using GitHub Actions. To host a website in Azure, you need 3 things. You need a resource group, you need an app service plan, and you need a web app. A resource group is the container that holds all of your other resources in Azure. An app service plan defines the compute resources available to a web app, so CPU, memory, etc. And then a web app is the actual application that runs on the app service plan. Okay, let's set up a resource group. In that left-hand menu, we're going to select resource group, and then we're going to click create. We're going to give our resource group a name, and then we're going to click review and create. Give that a quick review. If you're happy with it, click create. Next, we'll set up our app service plan. To do that, click create a resource, search for app service plan, and then click create. Make sure you use the same resource group that we just set up. Choose Linux as the OS, select a pricing tier, and then click create. Next, we'll set up a web app. Click create a resource group, search for web app, and then click create. Choose our resource group, set a unique name for the web app, pick your version of .NET. For me, it's .NET 9. Select Linux. Make sure to choose the same region as your app service plan. Now select the app service plan that we just created, click review and create, and then click create. Okay, so at this point, just a quick recap, we should have a resource group, an app service plan, and a web app. That's all of our required resources set up. Now let's deal with authentication. For GitHub Actions to be able to deploy to the web app we just created, we need to set up authentication. We'll do that using Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft Entra ID is a cloud-based identity access management service that provides authentication, authorization, and security for users, and in our case, apps and or devices. This is going to allow us to deploy securely without the need to store any kind of password. Okay, let's set that up. Let's search for Microsoft Entra ID. We're going to go to app registration, new registration. We're going to give our registered app a name, and then we're going to click register. Whilst we're here, let's make a note of that application ID and directory ID. Next, we're going to add a federated credential for GitHub. This will allow GitHub Actions to authenticate without storing a secret. To do this, for the app registration that we just created, we're going to go to certificates and secrets. We're going to go to federated credentials and then add credential. We're going to select GitHub Actions deploying resources as the scenario. We're going to enter our GitHub organization, repo, and branch. Then we're going to give our credentials a name, and we're going to click add. Finally, we need to give our registered app a role. We'll do this by going to subscriptions and selecting your subscription. We're going to go to access control, add. We're going to give our app the contributor role. We'll choose our app, and then we click assign. Now let's configure GitHub Actions to deploy to Azure. In your GitHub repo, let's go to Settings, Secrets and Variables, Actions. Then we're going to add a variable for our Azure Client ID, our Azure Tenant ID, and our Azure Subscription ID. Now let's create our workflow. For GitHub Actions to pick up a workflow, the workflow file needs to be stored in a .github/workflows directory, and we need to make sure that the workflow file that we create is created using the YAML file extension. We're going to start this off with how this workflow will be triggered. We'll make sure that the workflow runs automatically whenever we push a change into the main branch. For good measure, we'll also add workflow dispatch, which will allow us to trigger this workflow manually anytime that we wish. Now let's deal with the necessary permissions. The ID token write permission here will allow GitHub Action to request a token from Microsoft Entra. Now let's define a job called build and deploy. We'll run this job on the latest version of Ubuntu. That's typically faster and less resource intensive. Now let's go through each of the steps that are going to be contained within that job. First, we need to check out our code. Next, we'll set up .NET. I'm running on .NET 9, but please do make sure that you're using the correct version of .NET for your application. Now we can publish the app. We'll use the release configuration to get an optimized production-ready version of the app. And we'll output this to the build output directory. Now let's log into Azure. We'll log in by passing in the client ID, tenant ID, and subscription ID variables that we set up earlier. And finally, let's deploy to Azure. We need to make sure that we use the web app name that we created in Azure earlier, and we'll provide the build output directory that we published to. Okay, so that is everything set up. Let's see it in action. Here I've got a pull request ready to go. We'll merge this into main. Once merged in, if we navigate to the Actions tab, we'll see that our new workflow has been triggered automatically. We'll just give that a moment to run. Okay, that's completed successfully. Now we can navigate to our web apps URL, and we can see that our website is live. And that's it. You've just deployed to Azure automatically using GitHub Actions. The workflow we've just created is the continuous delivery side of a CI/CD pipeline. If you're interested in continuous integration, the CI part, then be sure to check out my other video on automatically running tests on pull requests. I'm Terry Mace. You've been watching Mace Labs. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.